after our wedding reception was not what any new bride wanted to hear. I had to tell her that our honeymoon had fallen through. The plan had been that we were going to spend some time at a house that my cousin owned in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. But on the morning of our wedding, I was told that my cousin was going to be using the house himself. So a few hours after our reception, we struck out on plan B. We didn't have a plan B, but we found a plan B, but that didn't work out. We ended up going with plan C. Instead of a big, beautiful house, we ended up in a extremely rustic two-room cottage. That wasn't what we'd been expecting. It wasn't what we'd been hoping for. But I guess looking back on it, it was sort of a sign of things to come, that our relationship over the years wasn't exactly what we were expecting or exactly what we were hoping for. That's been true for all of our close relationships, and I think it's probably true for any close relationships, not just ours.
We have been in Rhode Island for over 13 years now, and in the summer of 2020, Kim came as the pastor at North Scituate Baptist Church. We're going to show you part of our family here. We have two children, our daughter Kelly and her husband Joel, and their 4 children. Charlotte is 9, and then we have 3 boys, 7, 5, and 3. And they're a whole lot of fun, a lot of energy. And the good news for us is they live in Massachusetts, about 45 minutes away, so we get to see them really often. Not in the picture is our son Alan. He lives in Providence, and for about 10 years now, he's been in the restaurant business. He's done a little bit of everything, including being a chef. And about 8 months ago now, he stepped back from being a chef because he said, there's a lot I need to learn. And so he started working underneath a very talented chef in Providence. And about 2 months ago, he decided that working 40 hours a week wasn't enough. So he got his second job cooking, and now he works about 70 hours a week. Anyway, we're real proud of him. He's a great cook, and if you ever want to know the names of the restaurants where he works, we'll be happy to pass that along.
But this is not a commercial, so we're not trying to talk you into anything here tonight.
No.
Nancy and I attended different colleges in Virginia, but we were part of the same student group, and we met at a statewide conference. And one unusual thing about us is that we shared the same birthday, same day, same year. Now, I can tell you, if you're looking at us, yes, Nancy is younger than I am, about 7 hours. But you may think that's quite a coincidence that we would have the same birthday, but from my perspective, it's great planning. I mean, after all, I never have to worry about forgetting her birthday. And on top of that, I save money on eating out, decorations, birthday cake, and for a guy for a guy as frugal as I am, that's just a great deal.
Yeah.
Well, we've been married a long time. The good news is that after all these years, not only do we still love each other, but actually we still like each other. That's really a bit surprising because in many ways, Nancy and I are quite different from each other. For example, when we went to a water park many years ago, it struck me that Nancy's a lot like one of the rides in this water park. And the name of the ride was the Drifting River. Nancy likes to take things slow. She likes to relax. She's rarely in a hurry.
But in contrast, I recognized that Kim was like a ride called the Lightning Bolt. Fast-paced, straight to the point. Kim likes oldies music.
One of Nancy's favorites is country music. Nancy enjoys trying new foods and new restaurants. Nancy enjoys foods that I can't even pronounce.
Kim, on the other hand, is not particularly adventurous when it comes to eating. He likes to stick with food items and restaurants that he knows he's going to like. There are about 3 of each of those. Kim loves following the NFL, and he is interested, very interested in national politics.
Nancy puts up with me talking about the NFL and about national politics. We'll say a little bit more about ourselves in the course of our time this evening, but let's move on to the reason why we're gathered this evening. This evening we want to share with you what we believe is a great illustration of what we're up against in terms of building and then maintaining strong relationships. And we're talking particularly about significant relationships. We're not talking then about your relationship with the person who cuts your hair. We're talking about significant relationships. And so significant relationships would include the marriage relationship if you're married. Significant relationships might include relationships between child and parent, and between adult child and parent. Significant relationships would include close friendships. When we're talking about sibling relationships, we'd also include sibling relationships. We want to start out tonight by saying that unless you continue to invest in the important relationships in your life, those relationships are naturally going to deteriorate over time. Unless you continue to invest in those significant relationships in your life, those relationships are naturally going to deteriorate over time. And tonight we're going to try to illustrate this natural tendency towards deterioration, this natural movement towards deterioration. And we're going to do that by using the illustration or analogy of a map. Now, this analogy of a map was first conceived of and first applied specifically to the marriage relationship. It was written up in a book by Gary and Barbara Rosberg called Divorce Proof Your Marriage. But the principles apply to those other significant relationships that I mentioned as well. So even if you're here tonight and you're not married, there still should be something for you to take home. Again, I'll jokingly say, assuming you have any significant relationships, you should be able to apply much of what we talk about to those relationships, even if you're single or widowed.
The first stop on the map is what we call, or the Rosbergs call, the dream stop. Now, all of us want this kind of relationship. We want relationships that are significant, that are meaningful to us. And at least early on in your relationships with people, you assume that you're going to have this, that it's going to be satisfying. Now, we're not talking about fantasy here. A dream relationship is a real relationship with stress and difficulties. I'll certainly admit that. But we assume that a deep friendship or a marriage is going to be satisfying and fulfilling, where you're sharing things that are important to you. Now, we're going to have stress. We're going to have problems. Those can either hurt the relationship or they can make the relationship stronger and better. Now, I don't know if you ever saw or received, it was a little kit. I remember them from the 90s, a rock polishing kit. It came with a little box that had a motor on it and rocks, and then a package of sand. And you put the rocks inside the little box, and you sprinkled the sand in there, and then you turned it on, and it ran for hours, jiggling those rocks around in that box with the sand. Now, over time, those bits of grit would knock the rough edges off of the rocks and polish them. And insignificant relationships, that stress, those difficulties, those problems can actually make that relationship better. we're looking for, and the dream stop on our map here is satisfying relationships that we all long for, that we want. But without work, without effort, we can find ourselves spiraling down to the next stop.
Which is disappointment. And disappointment typically comes when you come up against unmet expectations. Now, being disappointed is not really a bad thing. Now, obviously, it's not fun. We'd all prefer to avoid it, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable in any significant relationship. Unmet expectations are an unavoidable reality, both in relationships and just in life in general.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some curveball that comes up that wasn't what we expected and wasn't what we hoped for. Well, in a relationship, again, disappointment itself is not the end of the world, because it's possible to love each other and yet still be disappointed. But the key is to learn to deal with disappointments quickly and effectively. If you can deal with the disappointments relatively quickly and relatively effectively, you can maintain or at least get back up to the dream stop on the relationship map. What's this mean in practical terms? Well, one thing it means, resolving conflict consistently. You can't avoid conflict successfully unless you have a significant relationship with a dead person. I guess you might not avoid conflict in that situation. But other than that, conflict is inevitable. Actually, I remember a counselor telling me one time, speaking specifically about marriage, if a couple says we never argue, one of them is dead. So again, conflict's not the problem, but dealing with a conflict in a quick and effective way is what's crucial, so that you don't continue literally downhill, using our diagram, in terms of the relationship. Well, in addition to resolving conflict effectively and quickly, dealing with disappointment is going to include encouraging each other rather than blaming each other. And very importantly, it's going to mean seeking and granting forgiveness. Now, frankly, I don't know that Nancy's and my relationship would be satisfying at all if we had not practiced seeking and granting forgiveness, seeking forgiveness from each other, granting forgiveness to each other. Now, both those aspects of forgiveness are tough. To ask for forgiveness means admitting that you've done something wrong. And that's going to go against our natural pride. Granting forgiveness to that person in a significant relationship with you is going to mean letting go of the hurt and the anger that you have because they've offended you in some way. Now, we could give a long seminar just on the issue of forgiveness. We could do that for hours, but for this evening I'm going to keep it relatively short and sweet. The main reason that Nancy and I can seek forgiveness from each other and grant forgiveness to each other is because we've sought and received forgiveness from God. A long time ago, we realized that we couldn't be good enough to earn God's acceptance and forgiveness. And we understood that that's the reason why Jesus came into our world and why Jesus laid down his life for us at the cross. A statement in the New Testament letter of Colossians says, "Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Well, that's a tall order, to put it mildly. That's incredibly tough. Yet realizing how much God has forgiven us and realizing that we don't deserve that forgiveness at all is what both motivates us and enables us to seek and grant forgiveness from one another. Well, doing these things that I've just talked about in the last minute or two will help you maintain or restore, move back from the disappointment stop on the relationship map to the dream stop. The alternative is continuing the descent down the mountain here to the next level, which is?
It's discouragement. Discouragement. This is where you find yourself when you allow disappointments to go unresolved. And when we talk about disappointments, I'm talking about things, we are talking about things that are repeated over and over again. When our expectations for each other are not met over and over again. Now, some days, honestly, I'm disappointed with Kim when really all that's going on is I've had a long day, I'm tired, and I skipped lunch. All right, I'm not talking about that. We're talking about significant things in a relationship that don't get addressed, and we can get to the point where we feel discouraged. Now, Kim and I have been married about 13 years, I think, and we decided to buy our first house. We'd spent 10 or 11 years living in the church parsonage. We were pastoring a church in Massachusetts. And we bought a fixer-upper, great house, but it needed a lot of work. And we both spent a lot of hours there, but I in particular spent a lot of time there. And all the time I was working, I was thinking to myself, once we have our own home, once we have a little separation from the church, Kim will be able to focus a little bit more at home. I knew that he loved us. He certainly loved us, loves us still. But he was really torn between the needs of the church and the needs of our family. Well, we moved into the house Mother's Day weekend, and within a couple of months, I realized that moving physically to a different place was not going to address the disappointment that I felt. And I was discouraged. And here are some things that happen when you feel discouraged with the relationship. You begin to focus on the negative. And I know these things for sure because I lived there. You become very me-focused. You tend to sort of think about. I call it stewing about the negative stuff. It's real hard to even think at all about any of the positive stuff that the other person is bringing to the relationship, bringing to your life. You can lose hope of ever having a satisfying relationship. You're not going to end the relationship, but you sort of get to the place where you think, wow, this isn't my dream for our relationship.
Well, it doesn't necessarily take long to move from the discouragement stop on the relationship map to the next stop, which is distance. I mentioned before that this relationship map was originally conceived of and talked about in terms of being a marriage map, and it was in a book by Gary and Barbara Rosberg, Divorce Proof Your Marriage. Well, in that book, the Rosbergs say this about the distance stop. Relational distancing is a natural byproduct of two people who love each other, yet struggle with how to connect deeply in the midst of disappointment and discouragement. Relational distancing is a natural byproduct of two people who love each other, yet struggle to connect deeply in the midst of disappointment and discouragement. With the distance stop in a marriage, couples often begin investing more of their time and energy in other activities or other relationships. Maybe they invest more of their time and energy in their children. Maybe they invest more of their time and energy in their careers and advancing up in their career. Maybe they invest more of their time and energy in hobbies, or maybe even causes or ministries. In marriage, many couples settle for this distance stop thinking, well, I guess this is as good as it's going to get. The dream was nice while it lasted briefly, but long term, I guess this is about all I can hope for. But you see that it's a far cry from the dream phase, the dream stop. Again, as we've said throughout our time, this is not just something that applies to marriage. Something similar happens in what was a close friendship. Again, other relationships or activities become increasingly important. They become priorities. They take precedence because the friendship isn't what it used to be. It's not as satisfying, it's not as open, it's not as warm as it once was. And so we distance from one another. In a parent-child relationship, or even a adult-child-parent relationship, that can also hit the distance stop. And when it does, the communication is superficial or infrequent, or maybe both superficial and infrequent. But for all these relationships, we want to encourage you tonight not to settle for just a distance relationship. Don't settle for landing and staying at the distance stop. It's probably not God's intent for that relationship. God can certainly help relationship be better than that. Well, from distance, it's a slippery slide to the next stop, which is
Disconnect. This is really depressing, isn't it? Anyway, we'll just keep going, and then we can come back to, just chatting about more encouraging things. But God made us to be connected. He made us to be connected in our relationships with important people in our lives. That's how we're wired. In a marriage relationship, with the commitment and the security that comes from that relationship and the vows you made, you can experience really deep connection. Over time, you're sharing joys, you're sharing sorrows, you're sharing struggles together, and all of those really knit you together in a significant way. But other close family relationships, friendships, they can be a tremendous source of connection. Those connections that we really need, that we desire as human beings. When the pain from disappointment, when the pain from discouragement causes us to distance ourselves from those important people in our lives, when we begin to fill up our life with other things and other people, we disconnect relationally. Now, at this stop, you can feel like, in a marriage, you can feel like, I live in the same house with you, but we're strangers. At this stop, husbands and wives are particularly susceptible to affairs. For other significant relationships, the disconnect stop may feel like what we used to have is gone. You were a big part of my life in the past, but now you're not. There still can be communication happening. You're still chatting with each other, but it's usually small talk. When we first moved to Rhode Island, I met a woman in our church, and she became very good friends. She showed me around. We used to go out together, out to dinner. Her husband traveled, and we would sometimes meet for dinner. We went for tea. We took long walks, and we talked about all kinds of things, just fun things, but also really deep things. We talked about our faith. We talked about our families. We talked about our relationships with our husbands.
I hope you said nice things.
I said real things. They were mostly nice. Mostly nice. But, and I cannot even really tell you why or what happened. I think we got busy. We had more we both had grandchildren, and pretty soon we would have appointments together, and she would cancel. And it happened repeatedly, and it just became clear to me that, other things were more important than our relationship. And I felt disappointed and discouraged, and we moved to the distance. There was no ill will there, no unresolved conflict really, but we definitely disconnected from each other. And we both miss that relationship. I know I do. And it can happen in friendships. It can happen between adult children and their parents. I think particularly in the teenage years, it's really tricky. Parents and teenagers working through some of the conflicts and the hardships, really. And during that season, we can get to the place where we disconnect from our children.
Next up on the relationship map is discord. A good adjective for this level in the relationship is contentious. This level, no offense, is too small to fight about. We'll fight about anything, we'll fight about everything. Because discord rules the day. There's almost constant strife. When a marriage hits this stop, couples often are looking to get out of the relationship. I think I've witnessed the movement from dream to disappointment to discouragement to distance to disconnect to discord in a number of couples. And to be honest, we've traveled most of that route ourselves. We at least got as far as distance. Definitely, probably not disconnect, definitely not discord, I can honestly say. We had some discord, but it wasn't constant. We weren't at the discord stop. But probably the most vivid example that we've seen was one couple that's part of our extended family. Now, it was a second marriage for both partners in this situation. And they, for a while, were definitely at the dream stop, the dream stage, the dream level. But over time, their significant personality differences quit being attractive and exciting to them as it was originally. So it's sort of what drew them together. But instead, those significant personality differences became frustrating and even repulsive to them. The disappointments piled up. And unlike what I was saying earlier about dealing with disappointments quickly and effectively, for the most part in their relationship, disappointments just got swept under the rug or maybe responded to with a snide comment or two. Well, eventually both the husband and the wife got discouraged. And it didn't take long to travel quickly down the rest of the mountain, the rest of the map, from discouragement to distance to disconnect to discord. Nancy and I witnessed both of them extremely miserable. They were continually irritated with each other, sniping at each other. I think basically they saw nothing good in the other towards the end of the relationship, even though they'd once been head over heels in love with each other.
The last stop on our map on this analogy is what the Rosbergs call emotional divorce. Emotional divorce. Now, at this point, the relationship, it's over. You know, it could be sort of declared dead. You can see that the people are, leaving from two different spots, two different doors. Now, sometimes couples in a marriage relationship when this happens, couples stay together. They stay together for appearances' sake. They sort of put a control or a cap or something on the worst of the discord if children are still in the home. They're they're trying to care for their children and not be too obvious. But sometimes couples will stay together even though emotionally they're divorced from one another. They stay together sometimes for financial reasons. But there's no life at this point in the relationship. They may not divorce legally, but emotional divorce is painful. It's miserable. And beyond that, beyond the cost, the human cost to a couple, it grieves the heart of God because it's not what God intends for the people that he loves so much. Now, in other close relationships, this divorce stop is not going to have the same ripple effect that emotional divorce in a marriage can have. It affects the children, it affects your friendships, it affects your community, your church community, your work community. But still, the sense of loss, of relational loss, is really bad in any significant relationship when you get to the point of being just done emotionally. There's sadness, there's regret, and often there's this sense of loneliness that just eats away at you. No matter what stop you find yourself on in this picture here, this map here, there is hope for any relationship. You know, I was thinking that, you know, if you found yourself at one of these lower spots like discord, and you ask God to come into the relationship and to help you work it out, your next best hope isn't to go from discord to disconnect. You don't go backwards in these pretty sad consequences. God would work in a different way to restore and rebuild relationships. You know, to get yourself, to find yourself on one of these lower stops on the relationship map, and to get back up to dream, to ask God to help you to reverse some of the damage and get back up to the dream stop is not guaranteed, but it is possible. I mean, we moved up. We restored with God's help. We restored, and I guess I could say we're living the dream.
Yeah.
You know, it's not guaranteed.
We were at least at distance, if not disconnected.
Yeah. At times we were pretty far down there, and we can talk about that if somebody wanted to hear about it. But you know, it's not guaranteed in any relationship. They're two people, and you have to both want to work on it, and both be committed to, recognizing and being honest about where you actually are, and then doing whatever is necessary to sort of reverse things and to find some satisfaction. You know, to a certain extent, we've been pretty honest that, you know, we didn't always have a dream marriage, and we still irritate each other. We still disappoint each other. We probably sometimes feel discouraged even, but we have a lot of time for questions. We weren't really sure how much time would be left here for questions, but if anybody had a question about anything, we certainly have plenty of time to take questions.
I would note, I don't have a question, but
Okay.
a long-term relationship matures and changes over time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Although there's a romantic start in a lot of young marriages, the romance does fall off in time. Not all of it. And there's more of a, I won't say friendship, but there's a more meaningful bond for me, in my mind. So I don't see myself at the dream. The dream, I think, was like the first 5 years I was with my significant other, and I think that was kind of a temporary thing. Then reality kind of sets in, and you adjust. That's my opinion. So 40 years of marriage,
Yeah.
and she'll tell you it's been painful. I'll tell you it's been a wonderful thing.
And perhaps our definition of dream is tweaked along the way. You know, I would say dream feels satisfying, dream feels secure.
The dream can change.
Yeah.
Because not everyone's dream might be the same as their outlook on the relationship. But I feel like that's just really being satisfied, comfortable, happy, joyful, just knowing
Right.
you're secure in that relationship. You know,
Yeah.
someone's there for you, there for each other.
And you want to be together. You know, I think that's probably significant part of the dream for me is that, you know, I want him to come home at the end of the day. You know, and there are lots of things that we need to work on. We need to work on the romance part, and I think we still could work on that part. And we always say that we know how to work, but we don't know how to have fun together as a couple. We're not very good at that. And Kim said recently he thinks he'll never retire because he only knows how to work. We only know how to work. But that's kind of, you know, having fun in the relationship, I think is important. We sort of see it that way. And so I think you can always be working at your dream. I think that it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you
Very-
said, it's helpful to clarify that we're not talking about, you know, pure bliss, pure romance, you know, with
Yeah.
stars in your eyes or stars in the sky or, you know, romantic music playing in the background as you go through life. You know, that's, you know,
It's a
that
film.
might be there,
It's a
might be
fantasy.
there in the courtship or the
Yeah.
dating period to some extent, and here and there, certainly, you know, hopefully relatively long-term in a marriage. But we're talking, as Nancy said, about satisfaction, fulfillment, trust, stability, security, you know, intimacy, not just or particularly physical intimacy, but intimacy in terms of, you know, I know this person, you know, she knows me, I know her, and we generally feel very good about that. Not perfectly. There are definitely things about me, Nancy, wish were different, and vice versa. But in the big picture, overwhelmingly,
Isn't it a
that
trust
knowing each other is
issue?
positive.
When you're married that long, you need to be having that trust with the other person. Because
Right.
if you lose that, even with a friendship, you know, if they,
Oh, yeah.
you hear something that, you gotta go to that person and talk to them, this is what I heard. You need that trust in a relationship, any relationship. You know, that's the most important, no matter how many years you've known each other, if you don't have that, there's always that undenying question. And that really solidifies a relationship.
Yeah.
It's having trust with that person.
Yeah, and I think what can sort of pick at and tear apart trust is not addressing the significant disappointments
Yes.
that we have and not being willing to, I mean, we are really different. We've said that in small ways, but in large ways, we communicate differently. And our pace in life is very different. I mean, we joked around about the rides at the water park, but in other ways, our pace and the way we move through life and make decisions, we're just so different. And if we don't adjust to each other and consider those differences in each other when we're making decisions, when we're just living our day, it breaks down that trust. We tear out the trust that we have because, you know, I need him to, and not just flex into, but I need him to appreciate the differences and what those differences bring to the relationship. And, you know, this has been a struggle for us to appreciate the differences, but we've gotten there
You find
pretty
when you have-
consistently.
When you have, when you're in a relationship And, you know, it's just the two of you, it's great, you have the two of you. But then you add children,
Yeah.
children are a lot of work. You know, they're, you know, 100% you have to attend to your children, 1, 2, doesn't matter. And that does bring wedge in between you sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so young couples who start with date nights once a week are really, they're connecting to each other, even if it's just going out to dinner. Even if it's the same restaurant every week.
Yeah.
You know, you need that connection, that trust, that connection. It's really important to try to, even during discouragement and disappointment, everybody's gonna disappoint everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all have different opinions. So even in that you need, then it's the trust should be one of the things, you have keeping that trust alive in your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And-
that you can depend on that person no matter what.
Right.
You know, if someone comes in and, because people will try to split your relationship up and interfere in your life, and you need to know that you need to trust each other. It's a very important part of the dream.
Yeah, it
is
is.
trust.
It's the mountain part. It's the foundation part.
Mhm.
It's what makes it's what makes the dream work.
Yeah,
Really.
You'll have family members that don't like your spouse for some reason and will start insinuating things, and you gotta really just push that person away and say, wait a minute, this is what I chose.
Yeah, and you invest
Yes.
in each other so
Mhm.
that you have a solid base to stand on when you're talking to anybody who's trying to discourage you and sort of feed that discouragement. And actually, I'm listening to my self-talk and listening to you and thinking about my friend that I've sort of just said, you know, I'm busy, you know, I need to pursue. I need to
I have a
pursue my
friendship.
friend and reinvest. And I certainly do.
I'm thinking on the same lines. I have a childhood friend that I'm trying to reconnect with. I know she's got a life and she's busy. I'm probably got more time than she does, but I'd really like to connect with her again.
Mhm.
Because we had such great friendship as children, or as young adults. And I can see where I see her once around, she's miserable, and I'm like trying to push, I don't wanna shove God down in her face, she loves God. But it's not like I go to Bible study or I do this, I wanna open it up a little more. So, I'm working on that, and that is where we're just a little discouraged and disappointment there. Trying to get that connection back together.
Yeah.
Got a question.
Mm-hmm.
At what point, as you're descending down that mountain, do you think it'd be wise to seek outside help, like a counselor, or?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, and it may depend. You know, Kim was talking about our family members who went very quickly from, you know, the disappointment to like way down to being disconnected very quickly. And, you know, seeking help like, in the disappointment stage for them, in the discouragement, probably for sure in the discouragement stage. You know, I think the value in something like this, you know, I said this is really sad and kind of depressing, but the value in this is it wakes people up, and it says my relationship is important, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to pay attention. So I don't know, honey. What do you think? Did you hear Tom's question? He said,
what's
at
point
what
to
point
see
do
a
you get
counselor?
outside help?
Yeah,
Soon, quick. I don't know. You know.
I think talking to somebody
Yeah.
would be helpful. You know, even at the disappointment stage, frankly. Again, not necessarily have to go to somebody who's got a PhD in counseling or something. But in terms of getting a second opinion, an objective look at what's going on, you know, I think probably typically, you know, someone who's older and wiser, or at least more experienced relationally, could be a huge help. And then And it doesn't have to be somebody who's, in their 80s or 90s. It doesn't have to have that much age and experience on you. But someone who's been around the barn a few more times, getting that insight can be extremely helpful at, at every stop on the map. I think of the guy who's my best friend. He was an invaluable source of wisdom and being a sounding board, and on rare occasions a figurative kick in the seat of my pants. Not a very literal kick in the, he didn't have to go that far, but and those kinds of people in our lives can be incredibly valuable. I think it's part of what what the Bible talks about in terms of many of the one another commands in Scripture that are to be lived out in our relationships with our fellow Christians in particular. But
Seems like it can be a challenge sometimes to find those kinds of people in your life, because so often, if you're experiencing some kind of disappointment or frustration in your marriage, you might go to a friend and say like, like this, and they'd be like, oh yeah, like that's ridiculous, and then and instead of like trying to get you to see things from the other perspective or trying to build up, try to heal the marriage, just like just double down on your frustration, like try to send you to stew stage.
Right. It's got to be somebody neutral in the relationship, but somebody with some wisdom, somebody that you trust, and you probably would have some sense. And you start small. You don't go in with where you're seeking some counsel and some guidance, sharing the big load. You just start and see how it works, and see how they respond. Do they respond in a way that's godly to you? And are they helping you? Are they holding you accountable? Because that's what you're looking for. That's what you really want. It's got to be somebody that you can trust to hold what you tell them closely. And that's just huge. It comes back to the trust issue when you're looking for guidance and counsel. I'm trying to think who we really sought out for that kind of thing. Was there Ed and Marion helped us a lot, I think. Anyone else?
Yeah, we benefited from some teaching, from some couples conferences and seminars we went to. God really used those in a big way in our lives. Some books we read, some messages we heard on Sunday morning,
And
all those things.
A huge thing for us was being part of a small group that was focused on relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And
Small group Bible study.
just helping each other. And those Bible studies gave us a chance to look at some things that were really hard to talk about. But it was the Bible study that was bringing up the hard topic, as opposed to him bringing something hard for me, or me bringing something hard for him. So it gave us a chance, so it's sort of neutral, a neutral party that brought us together to really look at some hard stuff. And I would say they, over time, those small groups were very helpful and effective in helping us grow up. Helping us grow up in our relationship with each other. And with our children, we learned a lot in some of those small group settings where you could talk about hard stuff with other people that you trusted about, how to be a parent to teenagers or toddlers. They're sort of the same. A lot of similarities between toddlers and teenagers. My sister had her children a lot younger than we did, so she had toddlers when we had teenagers, and we used to compare notes on the phone.
doesn't exactly address your question, how about a counselor, but one standard word of, I'll call it wisdom, it may not be wisdom, but I think it's wisdom, is, err on the side of doing too much. Let's say, again, we'll talk just about a marriage situation. If your marriage is somewhat rocky, maybe all you need to do is pray and ask God to speak to your heart, and then make some adjustments in response to what God shows you. Maybe that's all you do. But what harm is there of also running it by a trusted, wiser person who's got a solid marriage and will give you godly wisdom? None. And so, well, there's a little bit of possible embarrassment that you have to admit that to the person you're seeking out as a listening ear, a sounding board, or a mentor, or whatever. But in the grand scheme of things, no harm's going to be done if you do too much, but great harm could be done if you do too little. So I'd say you're on the side of doing a little more than is necessary. I'm going to say that about all the kinds of tough stuff in life. And it comes up frequently with people who are battling with addictions of one kind or another. I say, well, I can lick this. I can stop doing whatever it is. With God's help, I can do it. In theory, yes, you can, and maybe that will be what happens. But why risk it if an addiction or a situation, a relational problem is, destroying your life or destroying your family? You're on the side of doing too much. Small price to pay for the potential benefit.
With regards to disappointment, discouragement, eating into distance, as you're starting to kind of descend down the hill, do you think it can be something where it's not necessarily in the relationship, maybe it doesn't start out between the couple, where you could have something that, as you said about the disappointment, discouragement with the house, thinking that's going to help. That was something where you felt disappointed and then discouraged, but it was about how it was with the workload and the home load, the back and forth. But can it also be kind of almost like a pollutant from, say, throughout time you're going to get to points where you become discouraged with the way, you're doing stuff for work, or you get discouraged about certain things outside of the relationship, sort of. But then that starts to spoil your mindset,
Right.
which then leads over into your spouse's mindset,
Right.
which then affects the relationship.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it's not necessarily just between you, but
Right.
if either or
Oh,
is
yeah.
addressed, it becomes both of you.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind
Yeah.
of starts to go, and then now you're both at the point where you're kind of either overanalyzing something and thinking about something, now you get into discouragement, and then you think it's good, it's really, it starts down that, so it's something where,
That's right. Definitely,
Yeah.
other life situations, other factors in life can do a number on your close relationships, whether it's marriage, friendship, parent-child, sibling, as well.
Oh, yeah.
One thought that comes to mind just for our situation is that, with rare exception, throughout our marriage, we've typically done great when we're up against a tough problem, an outside problem.
Yeah.
To God be the glory, I'm not patting ourselves on the
Right.
back, but for whatever reason, that typically pushed us to be a real team. Okay, we've got, I'll just make it up. That Gretchen's really a pain, but how are we going to handle Gretchen anyways?
Yeah.
But seriously, whether it was a work situation, outside family situation, financial issues, whatever, for us, the harder part was when life was going relatively okay. That's when we got sloppy, preoccupied, lazy, and we didn't intentionally neglect each other, but we unintentionally neglected each other, or at least I'll pick on me. I big time neglected Nancy, and it was often a hard time or even a crisis, which at least temporarily, got us back together and we pitched in. But certainly, in spite of us being maybe an exception to that rule, what you're saying is absolutely right.
And we've sort of noticed about each other that we can take a kind of a rocky situation and make it even harder because we, you know, he's going no about whatever the situation, whatever the outside discouragement is, and then I'll go and pretty soon we're like way up here where we don't need to be.
Or
But-
something
Yeah.
silly,
Right.
just not understanding where the other person is coming
Right.
from, why they're not seeing it your way. I think
Right.
you really hit the nail on the head too, when you said that you sometimes just have to respect and acknowledge that you're just gonna be different in how you're thinking, your thought process,
Right.
your mindset, where you're coming
Right.
from. And I know sometimes it's so easy to just assume that you're married, so the other person should know exactly what you're thinking, how you're thinking it, what you might be overthinking, analyzing. That person should know exactly what is going on in my mind.
Right.
And we should think the same exact way, have the same opinion, and I think that's where, not
Oh,
just
yeah.
communication, but it's effective communication.
Right.
And being able to hear what the other person says, not just hear what they say, but you're hearing it your own way.
Right,
So you're kind of putting words into their mouth,
Right.
but not effectively listening.
right,
Because then the communication is literally like you're both blind, or like deaf to each other.
right.
You're hearing
One
it, you're
person's hearing.
communicating, But you're not actually in sync.
Yeah, I mean, communication in relationships could be a whole nother,
Right.
you know, a weekend conversation or, you know, session, workshop. Yeah, because that's really, it's really, really big.
We've got a little homework for you. You take what you've heard and make it personal, actually call it a project. Encourage you to take some time in the very near future, because you know in the very near future, likely to happen, it all goes down to next to nothing. It's not literally now or never, but it's probably very soon or never, if we're honest with you about life and how life can get in the way of good intentions. And whatever close relationship or relationships are most on your mind or maybe most relevant to what we're talking about. The first half of this, as it says, is to be done individually. And then ideally, the second half done with the other person. Again, it's possible that the other person, you know, if the relationship you're thinking about is so deteriorated, maybe that part's going to be next to impossible to pull off, because they're not open to it, or they're not interested, or they've, you know, perhaps you're mostly divorced from, you know, an estranged sibling or an estranged in-law or something, or an adult child. But if possible, that second half of the project can be especially meaningful. Maybe a little scary, maybe a little tough depending on where you are on the map with in that relationship, but very valuable. So I encourage you to do that. I would say if your schedule allows, we're wrapping up early here, you know, spend a few minutes before you get up from the table, so you at least get a dent in it, and that might help you be more motivated to polish it off. We'll stick around, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to.
we'll officially adjourn.
Yeah, just thank you, Pastor Kim and Nancy. I was super excited that they agreed to do this because Rockland Community Church tries to put on one of these seminars basically once every month while it's kind of in season to do so. And kind of part of our vision is we want this to be a cooperative, collaborative effort among our gospel believing churches here in Scituate. And so, you're bringing to the table things that I can't bring to the table, and just really glad that you're willing to do this for us. So thank you.
Welcome.
We had fun, actually. It's been a while since we did this kind of thing, so it was fun.
Yeah, we've done a lot of these kinds of things, but it's been probably 3.5 years since the last time. Hoping we weren't too rusty for you, but
Yeah.
I guess I shouldn't have admitted that. And I said, why? They were rusty now that you point it out to me.